The Big Bad Builder song just is coming right on time. Today we are talking yet more about cladding, and it's cladding matters. It's a sign for safety. Apparently it's the Earl's way or we all pay. Hamish, will you start us off, please?
Well, I think interesting, we're a little bit later for those who tried to tune in at sort of 3 o'clock. Our apologies on that one, but we can actually see the nights are creeping in. We're also getting nearer the time when discussions are going to be taking place. More discussions are going to be taking place in the House of Lords relative to the building safety scheme, which Earl of Lytton has actually been championing for quite some time. And we're very fortunate today because we have two people who've actually been working hard in that campaign, particularly Steve, who joined us actually from Royal Artillery Quays, because he's actually attended the House of Lords, as to Zahrah, who's actually joining us this afternoon as well. And they know an awful lot of the grinding, the hard work that's been going on to try and get those responsible for creating a very awkward situation to actually pay for it. As we know, or if we didn't know, we're going through some detail on this. The whole intention is, at the moment, we have nominated that the builders themselves will pay part. So they're going to pay part of the remediation process to make some buildings safe. The government have decided that the taxpayer is going to be paying goodness knows how many millions, as well as, just to help this particular sort of thing along. And the question is really, unless we put a balance in there, unless we actually make the person responsible for the mess that has been created, the burden is going to fall upon, the biggest burden is on the residents, those souls like Steve that are stuck in a place that, if you like, with safety issues, with financial encumbrances, which they themselves didn't create. The big builders themselves have created that. And we're speaking about Royal Artillery Quays at the moment, because that's where Steve happens to be based. But whatever outcome there is going to work on behalf of the millions of people in the UK who are dependent upon safe cladding on the flats in which they live.
And it's Steve and the Earl of Lytton have been, I would say, moving forces in putting together this new Buildings Safety Act, which is, are we on the cusp of being agreed, Steve? Are we getting closer to that point? What's going on?
Well, we have an opportunity this Parliament to table the amendments to basically protect all the leaseholders currently excluded cruelly by the Building Safety Act. So where things stand at the moment, just to give your listeners a bit of a taste. So 1.7 million leaseholders, people that own flats, are excluded by very cruel government legislation called the Building Safety Act, which came in a couple of years ago. Now, that is a problem for the value of those flats, because if you're liable for huge remediation bills because the government's excluded you, you have a kind of like a three-tier system. You've got those that are fully liable that will never get any help from the government, those that are partially liable. So there's a group of leaseholders that are kind of allowed to be protected partially, but they still got to pay 10,000 towards it if they're outside London, or 15,000. So that's another tier. And then you've got those that are fully protected. Now, of the ones that are fully protected, we've got partial remediations and permanently high insurance as a result of it, and potentially unsellable flats. So even those lucky ones outside of that 1.7 million are not finding that their flats are being remediated to the standard required. So this is the problem. Now, the solution is simple. A very simple solution. And it's basically around the same idea as if you owned a car. So if you think about it, the complexities of a car, there is quite a lot of complexity. You've got brake systems, you've got electronic systems, you've got all kinds of mechanical systems, all kinds of things that can go wrong. And they're all done by different companies, just like a building. So if a car goes wrong, you don't have to worry about which individual company broke the car component. You just go to the manufacturer, and then you don't usually, if it's egregious, have to go to court. They recall the car. They may even give you a replacement car. They recall the whole model in some situations, and then you'll get a replacement at no cost to yourself usually, and no court. That is what the scheme does.
If a builder builds a house and it's something they do, that once they've built it and they've screwed, surely they should go back and fix it, right?
Well, that's what you would have thought. But unfortunately, they have a very, very high threshold in terms of getting them to pay, and the court system backs them up. And also, we even have a limit, or had a limit before the Building Safety Act, of 6 years. So after they built the house, they had 6 years to be liable, and then they got out of it. Luckily, that has been extended, but it's still very difficult to get justice through the courts. So what we're planning to do is, going back to that car example, is blocks of flats. This is the retrospective, everything that's been built in the last 30 years, going back to 1992, will basically be allowed to apply to our scheme. So the owner of the building, at the request of either leaseholders or the building owner or freeholder themselves doing it, will apply for a grant from the scheme. Not a loan, a grant. And then basically some qualified assessors will come to the building and check to see if there's been breaches of building regulations at the time of construction, which we're seeing all over the place. We've got fire breaks missing. We've got fire breaks not stuck on the walls with anything more than plastic fixings, no fixings at all. We've got holes in the fire stopping between internal flat walls, big breaches of regulations. They will come and inspect these independent assessors, RICS qualified, and find the breaches. And if they find enough of them, and it's a very low threshold, then they will have the power under the law, because there's a quasi-judicial scheme, to make the developer or lead contractor or their parent companies, if they've wound up, pay in full and pay that grant off. If the developer structure doesn't exist, in the case of historic builders, then it goes to a wide construction industry levy, which includes the cladding manufacturers. And this will mean that no individual body escapes, including those cladding manufacturers, who basically really should pay, because they've made petrol-based products to put on people's homes.
But Steve, under the scheme, who would be making the reparations? Would it be the original builders?
Where possible, it will be either the original builder or the lead contractor, or if they use temporary companies, then it will be their parent companies. So some builders say, let's create Blog Street company to build Blog Street flats and then dissolve it, but it's owned by Barratt or Bellway or so on. So you can still go up the parent company structure to get Barratt to pay.
But do we trust them to make reparations when they made such a cock up of it in the first place?
Well, that's a great thing. So the scheme has got some nice features. So firstly, if they get whacked by the scheme, they go on a public register. Every single defective block of flats they're responsible for that this scheme identifies, they go on there. And then if they bodge the job, they go on again. And they get publicly shamed, and it will start to affect their standing, because if people can see on a government website just how bad the builder is, you can then compare them. And
what happens if the government have recently allocated one of those big builders to be a master builder, yet they're shown to be consistently malfeasant?
No, there's no escape, because they pay again and again and again for every defective block of flat they have. There's no developer contract with a one-off liability here. They pay again, and they don't have the protection of barristers in the court or the judiciary, because this scheme makes them pay bypassing all of that.
Well, we have our own pet representative of the judiciary here, Zahrah. Does this sound like it's going to have enough teeth?
Of course, that's why I've been supporting it. But I wouldn't consider myself a member of the judiciary. I'm not a judge. I'm just simply trying to do my job as a conveyancer, helping people into their homes. You know, when the things get taken to court, that's a completely different ballgame. And this is where people are getting stuck because the developers know, or what they're banking on is, you know, people maxing themselves out due to house prices or flat prices, and not having the money to pursue them under the legal route. So they know they can get away with it, and especially if they've set up what's called a special purpose vehicle, which is, you know, a temporary company to sell all those flats and then disappear to a tropical island.
Does that happen a lot? Has that happened a lot? And can we identify who these people are and publicly revile them?
You have to sort of have the nose of an investigative journalist to dig into all that, and that is not what a normal conveyancer's capacity or, you know, brainwave would go to dig into the background of such a developer. All we're concerned with is getting that piece of paper to say, yes, the building's safe for that person to live in, and we're happily being handed those certificates. Yet, as was explained to me when I met Steve, you know, these guys, you know, are happily putting up these buildings, saying they're safe, and yet when people go back to check them a few years later, that there's no fire safety barriers. And I've heard horrible stories of the contractors leaving urine and beer bottles or beer cans between the walls. That's no protection for anyone.
No, not really at all. Wendy, this must make you wring your hands in despair. Surely, how can any first-time buyer trust that any flat, which is the most common thing that common vehicle for a first-time buyer, is safe to even inhabit?
This is exactly it. It's a huge concern because you'd like to think that these flats are going to be safe for people to live in. And as you rightly said, quite commonly, it's first-time buyers who end up buying flats. So effectively, these flats are then being sold more cheaply on the market because people who have them are trying to escape from the issues that they're experiencing in these flats. And to be honest, it must be quite stressful living in them. Those cheaper flats then obviously look very attractive to first-time buyers because they have no awareness of the hidden costs involved with higher insurance costs, higher repair costs, which fall on their shoulders. And as Steve said, in any other industry, if there's a defect that's discovered, it's usually the manufacturer who is required legally to make a repair and correct the defect. But for some reason or other, that just doesn't happen in housing. And that is one of the most expensive ticket items that a person will often end up buying. So why do we have so fewer protections when it comes to home buying than we do for any other consumer item that we might purchase?
Hamish, it seems to me that given that the purchase of a property, you're muted, by the way. Given that the purchase of a property is one of the single most expensive outlays, and hence the most anxious or anxiety-ridden time, yet piling on top of this is the potential that the thing may quite literally burn to a crisp.
I think one of the saddest things to me is that whilst some people are aware of the situation, and a lot of people would like us to be quiet about it because it does actually reflect back on the unfortunate people who are living in these particular types of buildings. The other thing which comes to mind, and it's something I do repeat, and people recollect me having said this, we only know what we know. There are a large number of elderly people who in their last place of residence, they're taking out their last savings, their last monies, they're buying a flat in a residential home. And we haven't started on residential homes yet to look into the safety aspects of it. I mean, I see some going around. I mean, Bista's full of residential homes.
Right.
When you actually look in some of the people's life savings, and when you actually speak about the price that the people who live in Royal Artillery Quays, as an example, the London flats are, there's some woeful situations there. That
Goodness, yes.
all this money, they know where there is a serious element of it. They're keeping very quiet because they have to. They don't want to attract any attention, and people are having to sign non-disclosure agreements, so they won't admit to the fact that they know that they're living in somewhere which is both unsafe and financially disadvantaged. And this is the worrying thing about it. We have to make people aware of this. I do hope, and one of the reasons that we specifically we wanted to speak about the Earl of Lytton's scheme, because it does need signatures. This we've exceeded 75,000 in terms of signatures. If people can sign up, if you feel that the taxpayers should be paying for this, if the people who bought buildings in good faith should be responsible for this, that's absolutely sort of fine. But if you don't think that's right, for heaven's sake, don't find something about this scheme and sign up and sort of say, well, no, we don't think this is right. We do want the Earl of Lytton scheme to actually sort of get going and get things sort of moving, so something is started sort of straight away.
Zahrah, it seems to me that NDAs signed in this sort of scenario aren't worth the paper they're written on, because they're done with the full knowledge that what they're asking to sign away is their rights to support when they've been wronged so obviously.
You can sign petitions. That's not going to sort of affect a non-disclosure agreement. A non-disclosure agreement prevents you from speaking about things publicly. And so the way that they get these people to go away is to put a non-disclosure agreement, say we'll give you this sum of money, or we'll fix this, or we'll fix that, and you're not allowed to talk about it. That then brings up a conflict that I've raised with the Law Society, where, you know, people are asked to fill in these property information forms, and they're supposed to give truthful answers and not misrepresent anything. But there's nowhere that talks about a non-disclosure agreement. So
Right.
We won't know if on a new build, the sellers sort of agreed something with the developer and they're not going to say anything going forward. So that's a problem that we face. I tend to ask if there's any claims been made under the structural warranty and what that's all about. But these structural warranties are turning out not to be worth the piece of paper they're written on, because the way they're financed is the developer leaves a little pot of money with effectively they're an insurance company. And so if there's not enough money left in that pot, they'll just say it's not, you know, what you're complaining about is not valid, and try to sweep it under the rug, so that you don't have to pay anything. So literally organisations like the NHBC are sitting on piles of money because people haven't claimed under their warranties. They've just gone and got the work done because it's quicker to get it done that way, especially if there's an emergency. You just end up paying for things yourself rather than going under the warranty, and that's a really sad state when, you know, you've bought property in good faith with a structural guarantee, and yet when something that's gone wrong because the developer didn't do it properly, it just ends up costing you a lot more money for something that you thought you were buying peace of mind for.
God. Hamish, would you care to take us home, please, sir?
I think we've found out yet again that there's just so much we could speak about, and one of but with experts around us, and it's just a shame that we cannot. Well, we daren't actually sort of go on and speak about it. But one of the mentions there by Zahrah is NHBC. Now, one would hope we could rely on the NHBC as a national body to be representative of their particular sort of team and ensure that accurate maintenance of the standards to which we're meant to build and maintain. Now, it's not the case at all. Regulatory bodies need to be enforcing standards, which they aren't currently doing. As we all know here, we're all caught up with it. Steve, of course, in his worst possible scenario, because he's actually living within this particular sort of scenario. The more we speak about these things, the more I hope people become aware of it, and they will notice that they can do something. Now, like we sort of said earlier, it's not going to change anybody's life overnight, but the more support that the Earl of Lytton has in moving forward with his scheme, the more effective it will become. So if we could just get more people to sign into the acceptance of that particular scheme, that is a move forward, because it does mean by signing that petition, the government has to take notice. If they aren't taking notice already.
And if I could request, Steve, if you could put a link to the petition when you push out for this. I'm afraid, for no apparent reason, my video has failed. I will see if I can get me back. There you got reality. This is the reality of where I'm being right now. But reality is a good thing once in a while. All that remains for me to do is thank our esteemed guest, Steve Day of the Building Safety Scheme, Wendy Gibson of the First Time Buyers Club, of course, Zahrah Aullybocus of Nexa Law, and of course our esteemed mentor and leader, Hamish McLay of Search Convey. Watch out for next week for the next rip-roaring, exciting edition of What the Hell's Happening Next with cladding. But I'll tell you what, I feel like there is light at the end of the tunnel. But as I always say, let's hope it's not an oncoming train. Until next time, keep your feet on the ground, keep reaching for the stars, look after that mental health. For goodness sake, I wish you all well and have a lovely weekend. Bye-bye now.
There's a tale about some folks with hammers and some nails. They'll polish you the moon, but they would